Okay, so just kind of sharing how I come up with topics for mini lessons. I know sometimes that's really hard, especially when you're sticking with just one topic, because you don't want to make the mini lesson go too long. So we are working on All About Books in my second grade classroom. So I have my two examples of books that I've written, and then I have a couple of my kids' books that they have started, and I'm going to get some ideas. So we're done with immersion. We've gone through all of that, and I've taught a ton of stuff in that immersion phase. But now I'm going to really refine it and make it very explicit for that mini lesson and focus on one thing that I see in many books, not just one book. So if I just see that Christopher is struggling with punctuation, I'm going to deal with that with Christopher in a conferring session. Many lessons are for topics that you see going on in a lot of different stories. So one way to get mini lesson ideas is to think about maybe with what you struggled with while you were writing your books, or some of the things that you thought maybe your kids would struggle with as you wrote your books. So those were ideas that I wrote down for mini lessons. Things like thinking about your table of contents for an all about book, how to organize that table of contents. And that is one thing that you can teach in a mini lesson at the very beginning. As well as an immersion too, but a lot of times, especially with those all about books, they need that review. So I have just 3 books. I have my whole pile over there. But as I start looking through some books, I've noticed just some common themes in these books. So here are some things that I noticed. This is how I do it. So this is our genre or our unit of study. And then I just kind of make a list of possible mini lessons that I'm getting from student books and also from my book. On the other side is where I just make separate notes of what I want to talk about during conferencing. So Gumaro is having trouble remembering to put capitals at the very beginning. I don't need to spend time on that in a mini lesson unless several kids are struggling with that. So I'm just going to deal with that with Gumaro. Same thing with Christopher, is he needs to add some detail to his pictures, and that goes along with those nonfiction text features. But with Christopher, he's doing a great job on pictures, but it's more of like a fictional story instead of using those text features. That's something that I can talk to him about in that 5 to 7 minutes of conferring, and it doesn't need to be drawn out because it'll be a quick lesson and he can move on from that. So I've only kind of been through a few books, and this is my list so far of some common themes I see showing up in my different books. So making sure that they're adding more than one fact per page. So on a lot of them, they were just adding, like Saeed was just saying like one quick thing about dogs. Now this one he did really well, but then kind of right here, he just starts to go to one fact. And especially when he gets towards the end of his book, he's just putting one fact per page. So that's something that I can have a quick conferring session with him. I don't need to spend time talking to Saeed about his pictures and his nonfiction text features because he does an amazing job with those. So you can see he's talking about the different things that dogs do. So he doesn't need that lesson. That's something I can talk about in a separate conferring time. Another thing is punctuation. As rightfully so, they're second graders. So that's something that we can deal with, about putting that period at the end of every single sentence, every single fact. That's something that would be a great mini lesson and to just review with them. Also, the word wall. I noticed that lots of our words that are on the word wall are spelled incorrectly. So a quick mini lesson over that word wall just to refresh their brains about the words that are on the word wall and have them go back in their stories to fix. That's a great mini lesson for the whole class. Yes, it has really nothing to do with all about books, but it's still that accountability that needs to happen. Text features. So a couple of the text features I know that my kiddos are struggling with, the glossary, just how to kind of do that. And that's something that I need to kind of teach them a little bit better. I think it kind of got glossed over or talked about too quickly in the immersion phase. So that's something that I can show them during a mini lesson that will take just 5 to 7 minutes. And as you can see, like Saeed knows that nonfiction books have a glossary, but let me get to his glossary. But he wasn't too sure what to do with the glossary. So he has some words written down, but you can see he's not really understanding what types of words go in the glossary, and then he's also not defining them. So this would be a great mini lesson because several students have done that. So that was why I jotted that down as a note to have in the mini lesson. Another one is the table of contents. So we set this up really well in immersion, and they saw my example too. But what you can see is they are not putting their page numbers. They're remembering their headings, but they're not putting their page numbers. Christopher just listed his like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, but those don't match up with the correct pages. So that's something that I can have a quick mini lesson over. Same thing with Gumaro. So Gumaro just has his table of contents. Now he went back yesterday and put his page numbers because we had a quick little conferring session about that. And he saw my example in my book that he could use to do. So we talked about how I did it one at a time. So page 1 is what is hiking. I'm not ready for page 2 yet. I do it as I go to make sure I have the right number of pages. So that was a quick thing that I thought I could talk about in mini lessons with the whole class, and maybe even use Gumaro's book as an example, because one of the best ways during mini lessons sometimes is to have those student examples. Another one, detailed pictures. So our pictures in an all about book are there to inform or to teach the reader. And that's what I noticed a lot of my students, Christopher especially, like I was talking about. I can talk with this during conferring with him, but you can see he has great pictures, but it's more of like that fictional story format. So dogs have 4 legs, great picture, but now he needs to kind of label that and show us that here are these 4 legs. So you can see his pictures are detailed. He's a very good artist. He's including everything in his picture that he put in his writing. But now I want him to look at those nonfiction text features and add those labels, add those charts or whatever he needs to. And when I look through this stack, I know I'm going to see a lot of the same things in here. So that's why I'm going to add that as a big topic to cover in a mini lesson. And then, of course, we reviewed this a lot during immersion, but it's still something that we need to go over, fact versus opinion. So making sure that in all about dogs, that they're not saying things like dogs are cute, you should get a dog, dogs are the best pet. Really in all of these, they all did dogs on these. But in some of our other all about books, just making sure that they're adding facts and not opinions. So that's something that I'm sure I'll come across when I go through this stack of books also. And then again, as I go through books, if I find something that I know will be a quick conferring lesson to have with kids, I'm going to write their name over here. This then is kind of like my tracker or my kind of progression for mini lessons. I can pick what I want and then I just mark it off after I've done it. And then I will keep adding to it as I see other big topics that come up in many different books. One question I did have is, what do you do if they copy your book? That's where they are sometimes in that writing process. So we want them to work on their craft. And if they need to copy, if they need to do fish and use some of the ideas that were in my fish book, that is totally fine because they're still having to do the text features. They're still having to write. They're still having to add the facts, work on the punctuation, work on the capitalization. So if they do fish, it's totally fine. They're not writing the book exactly like you wrote the book. So don't ever panic if they're doing the same book as you, because what's going to happen is they're going to start to feel comfortable and then they're going to move on to their own books. And so sometimes they just need that little bit of our support this way in their first book, and then they'll get going. So that's just kind of how I plan out my mini lessons. Totally different than the immersion stage. And then these are just how I know some quick things that I want to talk about when I conference with students. And as I go through more books this evening, this list will get a little bit longer. But I'm conferring with these kids daily. So it's something that this is good for me. It's not more work for me. It's now I know exactly what I can hone in on to help these students because I'm conferring every single day during writing time. So this is kind of just a little bit of organization technique that helps me instead of just pulling things out of my head the day of. I can get this exact from their books and know where I need to go.